Kamano Manato is the first ever A-rank Rupture agent in Zenless Zone Zero, and he's honestly one of the craziest A-rank DPSs that we've seen so far. As one of the most anticipated characters thus far, many players are eager to add him to their roster. However, he's not a perfect fit for everyone, as his kit and performance comes with very clear strengths and weaknesses. Before we dive into the guide though, keep in mind that the footage shown here is from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change. But if you enjoyed or learned something from today's video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. With that out of the way though, grab your monochromes and let's get started. Manato is a DPS who benefits the most when he's sitting at low HP. With this, his gameplay revolves around building up his resource bar to enter an enhanced state, but he has to sacrifice his own HP to do so. That said, many of Manato's abilities have ways to heal / mitigate damage dealt to him. When it comes to playstyle, however, Manato does feel somewhat similar to agents like Soldier 11 and Evelynn. Like Soldier 11 though, Manato shines best after using the double chain attack trick and when hitting stunned enemies. Despite this though, similar to Evelynn, Manato is also rewarded when timing his parries and can even deal respectable DPS when dealing damage outside of a stun window. Now let's break down Manato's kit, starting with his unique resource. Manato's unique mechanic is Blazing Heart, which can be seen under his health and energy bar. He can hold up to 100 of said resource, and once he accumulates 75, he automatically enters the Molten Edge state. During Molten Edge, Blazing Heart is gradually consumed until fully depleted, and this is where his kit truly shines. Once consuming Blazing Heart, his attacks become empowered, increasing his own crit rate and fire damage, and as a result, you'll want to maintain Manato's enhanced state for as long as possible to maximize his damage potential. Manato's core passive, Mighty Molten Edge, is where Manato receives most of his free stats. The previously mentioned Blazing Heart is a key part of his core passive, and whenever he uses his special attack, Return to Ashes, Sacrifice, or triggers a defensive assist, he builds Blazing Heart up to a maximum of 100. At 75 or more though, he automatically enters into the previously mentioned Molten Edge state, which of course is high priority for him. Said state also comes with huge bonuses though. Consuming HP during his basic or his assist follow-up increase said attack's crit damage by 50%, while also increasing adrenaline generation by 100%. Moving on, Manato's additional ability activates when a stun or support agent is present on the team. With this, when he launches an ultimate or chain attack, he gains 8 or 4 stacks of Remnant Flame respectively, lasting 60 seconds and stacking up to 20 times. During combat, using a basic attack or assist follow-up will also restore 2% of his max HP per stack if he's below full health, and this is just one of the ways that he prevents himself from dying throughout most fights. Manato technically has access to 2 basic attack combos, but since he prefers being in the Molten Edge state as soon as possible, he focuses primarily on using his Flame Infused combo. While using said combo, Manato will deal fire damage for up to 4 slashes, turning Blazing Wind Slash into Blazing Wind Misty Slash, consuming 3.5% of his max HP. When pressing his special attack, Manato performs a forward slash that deals fire damage, but during this move, if he takes a hit, he restores 20% of his max HP and enhances said skill, though the healing effect can only trigger once every 20 seconds. Regarding his special attack though, this will change further if he chooses to hold said ability. When doing so, first, upon holding said special, Manato will then begin entering a charging state, consuming his max HP and gaining 100 Blazing Heart. However, like with the simple press of his special, Manato will also gain health when struck while charging. Things will change once again though when Manato is in the Molten Edge state and when using his EX special. Once used, Manato will then leap into the air and launch a downward attack, dealing fire damage, and while this attack already deals a significant amount of damage and is valuable, it's also worth mentioning that said attack will restore 33% of his max HP upon activation. Now let's move on to Manato's assists and dodges. At first glance, both may seem fairly standard compared to other agents, but they do also come with important details that set them apart. When performing a defensive assist, Manato immediately restores 75 Blazing Heart, which is already huge, but following this, his assist follow-up attack will perform 7 consecutive slashes. This follow-up attack is notable as it does deal pretty significant damage, and as you'll see later in the Manato guide, his second Mindscape does also allow him to follow his special attack with said follow-up, offering yet another way to deal good damage. Manato's chain attack is fairly straightforward, focusing primarily on dealing damage, but while the attack itself doesn't come with any special mechanics, what makes it noteworthy is the passive effect tied to it. Each time Manato performs a chain attack, he gains 4 stacks of Remnant Flame, which again stack up to a maximum of 20 and can heal Manato, but this alongside the chain attack's high damage makes it especially worthwhile to perform the double chain attack trick with Manato. Finally, let's talk about Manato's ultimate. When activated, Manato deals a high amount of damage. And on top of the raw damage, activating his ultimate also grants 8 stacks of Remnant Flame, further stacking his special mechanic and giving him additional HP recovery from his additional ability. For Manato's pre-farm, you'll need 3,705,000 Dennies, 300 Senior Investigator Logs, 25 Basic Burn Chips, 75 Advanced Burn Chips, 250 Specialized Burn Chips, 4 Basic Rupture Certification Seals, 32 Advanced Rupture Certification Seals, 30 Arbiter Rupture Certification Seals, 5 Hamster Cage Passes, 9 Crimson Miasma Spikes, and 60 Higher Dimensional Data Corrupted Dream Steel. And now, a brief disclaimer about the team testing for today's video. As always, the main goal was to ensure all primary agents had their additional abilities active, since missing these can lead to a noticeable drop in overall DPS. For non-DPS agents, however, their additional abilities were technically lower priority, and that means that certain supports, utility, or buff characters were sometimes tested without them. Lastly, all agents were equipped with their ideal signatures / W engines and tested at M0 for S ranks and otherwise M6 for A ranks. Finally though, these results are once again anecdotal and mostly meant to serve as guidelines or indicators for each team's general performance, not perfect representations of their complete and total potential. That said, we do also have to take a moment to acknowledge the state of the current Deadly Assault rotation. At the moment, Rupture agents have an extremely powerful buff, which many will take advantage of once the rotation is live, and just in terms of number and performances, typically accounted for a 5,000 to 8,000 score increase just by having it active. As a result, the first few weeks of Deadly Assault performances from Manato and even Lucia should be interpreted with caution and care, as they may seem way stronger than they really are. That said, there were other factors that also affected the ability to test agents in the current live server, and though I've already covered it at length in my Lucia video, to summarize, the testing availability for bosses this time was more limited, some of the non-rupture based Deadly Assault buffs were extremely weak, and avoiding disadvantageous situations was almost impossible. Finally, and I cannot stress this enough, if you don't see the exact team that you're looking for in this video, join the Discord to take a look at the full list of clears and scores first. And though I apologize for not being able to include and talk about every lineup, since this video would otherwise be hours long, I promise I've at least included, tested, or tried some variation of every team in said document. As a final note though, if you still can't find the team that you're looking for with this, feel free to DM me with any questions, as there may be another reason for this, or I can figure out what went wrong. Now let's talk about a few of the Manato teams that I tested. Let's start by talking about a team that included a stunner and a support. Within this category, the best performing lineup was Manato, Jafufu, Lucia, to no one's surprise, but in terms of score and performance, this was definitely a bit more unexpected, as the team cleared in about 73 seconds and scored anywhere between 30 and 43,000 in Deadly Assault. Replacing Lucia with Asher Yao resulted in a slightly slower 76-second clear and a much lower 18,000 Deadly Assault score, but this, from what I could tell, was just further proof of just how insane Lucia was, even from just a numbers point of view. Next, we had the Manato lighter team though. With Lucia, this again cleared in about 67 seconds and averaged 25,000 in Deadly Assault, but with this again, keeping lighter and Manato, however replacing Lucia with Asher Yao, resulted in a slower 76-second clear and another sub 20,000 score. Now, in regards to Manato's free-to-play / more accessible team, which was Manato, Pan Yinhu, Pulchra, this team was a bit disappointing as it was slower with a 1 minute and 41-second clear, also struggled quite a bit, sometimes not even managing to reach an A rank / 2 stars in Deadly Assault. This of course resulted in a 38% slower clear on average, with a 60% lower score compared to its competitors, but I'm sure that though I wasn't able to get a super impressive score here, there's probably a rotation or a player that could definitely clear with said team. From this though, it was very clear that Manato certainly excelled and certainly performed well when he had access to Lucia, but without her, he definitely struggled and felt tough to make work, even with the current powerful rupture buffs of the Deadly Assault. Next, we had the double buffer category though, where teams like Manato, Astra, Lucia showcased noticeably stronger performances. These lineups had decent clear speeds of around 70 seconds, while also reaching a comfortable 30,000 points in Deadly Assault, but meanwhile, a close competitor and alternative to this lineup, like Manato, Nicole, Lucia, fell behind both in clear time and scoring, averaging only around 80 seconds for clears and roughly 27,000 points in Deadly Assault. With these results, it was apparent that Manato could put up respectable performances, assuming that he at least had access to Lucia, but once taking a closer look, it became way more clear here that Manato was taking full advantage of Lucia's amazing buffing in the current Deadly Assault. Therefore, though both the buff and Lucia are great, Manato without either takes a hit in performance, which is something that you should keep in mind. The next lineup that I tested, however, were double stunners, and the highest performing teams were Manato lighter Pulchra and Manato lighter Jafufu. These teams had pretty respectable results, clearing in around 71 seconds, but the lineup definitely struggled in Deadly Assault, where it only averaged around 17,500 points. Overall, one of the main struggles that I had when trying to run this double stunner team was the lack of additional ability coverage in certain lineups, and as a result, most teams suffered in score as they weren't able to show their full potential. To be clear though, this was more of a case where stunning wasn't necessarily as buffed or as strong as it could be, especially with the current bosses, miasma, and deadly assault buffs. However, in the future, I could definitely imagine the performance of double stunners to be more acceptable or strong, as this rotation felt way more punishing to characters who base their damage exclusively on stun windows or attack. The last set of lineups that I tested though were double DPS, and this included teams like Attack, Rupture, or even Anomaly agents. Now the team of Manato Orphe Lighter performed very well, managing to clear in just 70 seconds. However, while its clear speeds were decent, there were still troubles with the team, as the lineup barely managed to clear Deadly Assault with an S rank or 3-star rating. Swapping Orphe out for other options though, like Bernice, was met with similar though sometimes better results, and in said cases, Bernice could reach the low or mid 20,000s, especially when paired with Lucia. But that said, though I was pretty disappointed by Manato's performance with other DPS, even though it does technically make sense since he's more of a main DPS, many of Manato's other options for team lineups even struggled to sometimes get an A, yet alone an S, and as a result, I was actually pretty decently satisfied with Manato's versatility in this case. As a final note for a few of these lineups though, it is worth mentioning that some teams were certainly carried harder by Manato, Lucia, or some other factor, and with this, I ask that you just be careful when observing or testing certain lineups together, as the last thing you'd want is a character who does absolutely nothing for a team and just gets dragged to a clear. Now, in regards to alternatives to Lucia, I have bad news, as there really aren't that many well-performing Manato lineups if you don't include Lucia with him, and with this, Pulchra, Lighter, Penyinhu, and Caesar were all technically decent in some cases when used with Manato, but admittedly, and especially when paired without Lucia, these supportive agents were way less effective and sometimes couldn't even make it past a 12 or 15,000 clear. Now let's talk about Manato's build. When it comes to Manato's engine options, Gorilla-Wisp, his signature W engine, stands out as his definitive best in slot choice. Its base stats are perfect for him, granting 15% fire damage, of which directly increases his overall damage, but what makes said engine special though is through its other passive, where whenever the user's HP decreases, their crit rate increases by 15% for a short duration, making it both designed for but also great for Manato. That aside, there are still strong alternatives. Qingming Birdcage serves as an excellent alternative for Manato, and even though he can't fully take advantage of the second half of this passive, it still offers a notable 30% HP increase and 20% crit rate boost. Next, using a crit rate or crit damage focused W engine like Steel Cushion is another solid alternative. Now, even though Manato can't obviously fully utilize this passive, an option like this still serves as a reliable stat stick, providing decent stats that do improve his DPS without relying on specific conditions. For more free-to-play or accessible options, there are a few solid choices worth considering. Radio Wave Journey is a strong alternative for Manato, offering an HP main stat and a useful passive, and similar to Qingming Birdcage, the HP-based main stat makes it much easier to build with. Now, while Radio Wave Journey is technically locked behind the Battle Pass, it remains one of the most reliable and well-rounded options for players who have access to it, especially as there aren't that many Rupture options in general. Puzzle Sphere is another great free and craftable option for Manato, offering decent stats and a usable passive too. Said passive grants 16% crit damage after using an EX special attack, and this will also increase EX special attack damage by 20% when hitting enemies below 50% health. Now, while this does also still lack the HP scaling synergy of other options, the consistent damage still makes Puzzle Sphere a good choice for free-to-play players. For Manato's disk drive setup, the Yunque Till set is easily his best 4-piece option. The 2-piece bonus here increases his health, helping his sheer force scaling, and the 4-piece effect takes it even further, granting stacking crit rate whenever he uses abilities and increases his sheer damage at full stacks, and this of course is something that Manato can consistently activate and maintain during combat. Now, with this natural synergy and valuable stat boost, Yunque Tills is the clear standout and best set for him, which is honestly pretty nice, as A ranks do not receive dedicated sets. Manato's 2-piece set choice here is where he has more options though. Sets like Woodpecker Electro, Branch and Blade Song, or even Inferno Metal are all usable, but all 2-piece options here regardless will help Manato in some way, shape, or form, but ultimately your choice depends on what stats your build needs the most or what discs have rolled best for you. Finally, for main stats, you should be aiming for a mixture of crit rate and crit damage on the 4th slot, fire damage bonus or HP percent on your 5th slot, and HP percent again on the 6th slot. Once again though, although you aren't technically able to pull for or build Manato yet, I do also have the ideal stat line that you'll be looking for Manato, and with this having roughly 17,000 health, 50 crit rate, and 150 crit damage will be your goal, but as a reminder, these numbers can definitely fluctuate a bit as his sets, main stats, and W engine all play a part in changing and scaling his damage. Finally though, let's talk about the pros and cons of Manato after my extensive testing with him. First, Manato is given out for free, making him very accessible, and second, he can technically be M6'd easier since he's an A rank character, but in addition to this, he also serves as a strong fire DPS alternative if you don't have Soldier 11 or Evelyn. But finally, he currently outputs some of the highest damage among all A rank agents, which is something that most others can't brag about, even if you use characters like Yuzaha or add multiple limiteds. With this though, he of course still has his cons. First, he has a fairly high skill ceiling as it does require pretty careful management of his resource bar and HP balancing, but on top of this, he is highly dependent on premium teammates like Lucia and Jafufu in order to reach a respectable or obviously his max potential. Now, in addition to all of this though, his current performance is also somewhat biased / skewed due to the new Deadly Assault buffs favoring Rupture agents. But guys, to summarize, Manato is a powerful Rupture agent with incredible synergy and a strong emphasis on timing. His ability to generate his resource while consuming his own HP is a definitely more fresh and engaging playstyle. Personally, his raw strength alone makes me think that he'll definitely be a character that most free-to-play players will want to build, and I'll definitely be testing him more once he hits the live servers. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good luck if you end up pulling for or playing Manato.